Cate Blanchett thought she was going to star in a light Woody Allen comedy about wealthy Manhattan socialites. Then she read the script for Blue Jasmine and realized Woody had written the most devastating character study of female mental breakdown in cinema history. The role nearly destroyed her psychologically, but it won her an Oscar. But before we dive into this story, if you enjoy untold moments from cinema history, hit that subscribe button and stay with us. It was February 14th, 2012, Valentine's Day in Manhattan, with snow beginning to fall on the Upper East Side. Cate Blanchett walked into Woody Allen's modest office on East 79th Street, expecting to discuss what her agent had described as a sophisticated romantic comedy about wealthy Manhattan socialites. She'd worked with prestigious directors like Peter Jackson in the Lord of the Rings trilogy and Todd Haynes in I'm Not There, but collaborating with Woody Allen represented the ultimate validation for any serious actor interested in psychological complexity and sophisticated dialogue. What she discovered instead was a 110-page psychological nightmare that would challenge everything she thought she knew about acting, mental illness, class privilege, and the devastating cost of living an entirely artificial life. Blue Jasmine wasn't a comedy in any traditional sense. It was a clinical, unflinching study of narcissistic personality disorder disguised as mainstream entertainment. The character of Jasmine French, originally named Jasmine Francis before Woody changed the surname to suggest even more artifice and social pretension, was a woman experiencing a complete psychological breakdown while desperately maintaining the increasingly fragile facade of sophistication and upper-class status. This wasn't the charming, neurotic Woody Allen protagonist that audiences had come to expect from his films. This was something much darker, more psychologically complex, and more emotionally devastating than anything he'd written in decades. Woody had been developing this story intellectually for years, but the creative inspiration crystallized during the Bernie Madoff scandal of 2008. He watched wealthy Manhattan socialites lose their fortunes overnight, forced to confront the terrifying reality that their entire identities, social connections, and self-worth were built on elaborate financial illusions that could disappear instantly. But instead of focusing on the financial crime itself or the mechanics of the Ponzi scheme, Woody became fascinated by the psychological aftermath, the human cost of losing not just money but the complete worldview, identity, and social structure that extreme wealth had supported for decades. Jasmine French was the perfect embodiment of this psychological and social collapse. She was a woman who had lived her entire adult life as expensive decoration for her husband's wealth and social status, completely unprepared for independence, meaningful work, or authentic relationships based on genuine compatibility rather than economic advantage. When her husband's Ponzi scheme was exposed by federal investigators and he committed suicide in prison rather than face the consequences of his crimes, Jasmine was left with literally nothing: no money, no practical skills, no genuine friends, no authentic identity, and no psychological resources to rebuild her life from scratch. The role demanded everything Cate had learned about acting throughout her distinguished career, while simultaneously pushing her into psychological territory she'd never explored professionally. Jasmine wasn't sympathetic in traditional dramatic ways. She was narcissistic, self-absorbed, delusional, and often genuinely cruel to people who were trying to help her navigate her new circumstances. But she was also clearly a victim of a social and economic system that had trained her from childhood to be helpless, decorative, and dependent rather than capable, independent, and psychologically resilient. Woody's directing approach with Cate was unlike anything she'd experienced with other filmmakers throughout her career. He didn't explain the character's psychology extensively or provide detailed backstory information that wasn't explicitly included in the script. Instead, he expected Cate to discover Jasmine's emotional reality through the performance itself, trusting that the right actress could find psychological truth in the dialogue and dramatic situations he'd carefully constructed. "She's having a nervous breakdown" was essentially all the character guidance Woody provided during their initial meetings. But she can't afford to admit it to herself or anyone else because acknowledging her psychological condition would destroy the last remnants of her carefully maintained self-image. So she has to maintain the sophisticated facade while falling apart internally. This minimalist approach terrified Cate initially. She was accustomed to directors who discussed character motivation extensively, who provided comprehensive psychological frameworks and detailed backstory information that helped actors understand their roles intellectually before attempting to embody them emotionally on camera. Woody's method was precisely the opposite of this traditional approach. He wanted the performance to emerge from instinct, observation, and emotional truth rather than intellectual analysis or predetermined character choices. He believed deeply that the most powerful acting came from actors discovering their character's psychology in real time during filming, rather than planning emotional beats and dramatic moments in advance. The preparation process for Blue Jasmine was unlike anything in Cate's extensive previous experience as a professional actor. Instead of researching similar characters in other films or studying psychological literature about narcissistic personality disorder and financial trauma, Woody encouraged her to observe real women in similar social situations. Wealthy divorcees attempting to navigate social events without their former economic status. Older women competing with younger women for male attention and validation. People desperately maintaining dignity and social position while their lives collapsed around them. This observational research became absolutely crucial to Cate's eventual performance. She spent weeks in expensive Manhattan restaurants, exclusive charity events, and upscale social gatherings, carefully watching women who were essentially performing elaborate versions of themselves rather than being emotionally authentic or psychologically genuine. The performance of wealth, sophistication, cultural refinement, and personal happiness became central to understanding Jasmine's character and the psychological mechanisms she used to avoid confronting her devastating circumstances. But the most challenging aspect of the role was finding genuine sympathy and emotional connection for a character who was often genuinely unlikable in traditional dramatic terms. Jasmine was consistently cruel to her working-class sister Ginger, dismissive and condescending toward people she considered beneath her social status, and completely self-absorbed even when others were making genuine efforts to help her through her crisis. Traditional acting training teaches performers to find ways to love and understand their characters emotionally, but Jasmine seems specifically designed to resist love, sympathy, or easy emotional identification from audiences or the actor portraying her. Woody's crucial insight was that Jasmine didn't need to be conventionally likable to be dramatically compelling or psychologically fascinating. Real people experiencing serious psychological breakdowns aren't consistently sympathetic or emotionally accessible. Mental illness often makes people difficult, demanding, manipulative, and emotionally exhausting to be around. Jasmine's persistent unpleasantness, narcissism, and social cruelty were integral parts of her psychological reality rather than character flaws that needed to be minimized, explained away, or balanced with more appealing personality traits. This artistic realization freed Cate to explore aspects of human psychology that are usually avoided or sanitized in mainstream commercial cinema. Jasmine's narcissism, her profound sense of entitlement, her complete inability to empathize with other people's problems and perspectives. These challenging traits were symptoms of her psychological condition and social conditioning rather than moral judgments about her fundamental character. The filming process was emotionally intense in ways that surprised everyone involved in the production. Woody typically maintained a light, casual, almost playful atmosphere on his film sets, joking with actors between takes and keeping the overall mood relaxed and collegial despite the technical demands and time pressures of professional filmmaking. But Blue Jasmine required a fundamentally different approach because of the emotional weight, psychological complexity, and dramatic intensity of the material. The character's mental state was so psychologically specific and emotionally demanding that it affected the entire production atmosphere. Cate found herself staying in character between takes much longer than usual, not because Woody required method acting or demanded emotional continuity, but because leaving Jasmine's psychological state felt jarring and emotionally difficult to manage repeatedly throughout each filming day. The character's persistent anxiety, clinical depression, delusional thinking, and desperate social performance were so psychologically intensive that maintaining the emotional reality felt easier and more authentic than constantly transitioning in and out of such complex mental states. This deep commitment to the character's psychological reality created some of the most emotionally authentic and dramatically powerful moments in the finished film. The scenes where Jasmine talks to herself on New York streets, mentally rehearsing conversations, or compulsively reliving traumatic memories, emerged directly from Cate's sophisticated understanding of how people experiencing psychological breakdown actually behave when they believe no one is observing them. Woody was particularly impressed by Cate's ability to demonstrate Jasmine's fundamental intelligence alongside her obvious psychological dysfunction and social delusions. Lesser actors might have played the character as simply crazy, pathetic, or comedically eccentric, but Cate understood that Jasmine was genuinely intelligent. Her mental abilities had simply been channeled into manipulative and superficial directions rather than authentic personal development or meaningful social contribution. The prescription drug dependency, the compulsive drinking, the pathological lying, the inappropriate sexual behavior with much younger men. These weren't random symptoms of general mental illness, but logical psychological responses from a woman who had never developed genuine coping mechanisms for stress, disappointment, financial insecurity, or authentic self-reflection about her life choices and personal limitations. The collaboration between Woody and Cate became one of the most creatively productive director-actor relationships of his later career. She understood his distinctive dialogue rhythms instinctively, finding the natural music in his carefully constructed sentences while making them sound completely spontaneous and unrehearsed during filming. But more importantly for the film's ultimate success, she understood the profound psychological complexity he was exploring through Jasmine's character development. This wasn't a simple story about privileged people losing money during economic downturns. It was a sophisticated examination of how American culture systematically creates women who are beautiful, charming, socially skilled, and completely unprepared for independence, meaningful work, or authentic relationships based on genuine compatibility rather than economic convenience. The performance required Cate to access genuine emotional pain and psychological vulnerability while simultaneously maintaining Jasmine's desperate determination to appear sophisticated, cultured, and in control of her circumstances. The fundamental contradiction between internal chaos and external composure became the central artistic challenge of the role and the key to its eventual dramatic power. When Blue Jasmine premiered at the prestigious Venice International Film Festival in August 2013, critics immediately recognized that Woody had created something genuinely special and that Cate had delivered a performance of extraordinary psychological complexity and emotional courage. Reviews consistently noted the remarkable bravery required to play such an unsympathetic character with such unflinching emotional authenticity. The film's sophisticated exploration of class anxiety, gender expectations, economic inequality, and psychological fragility felt particularly relevant in post-recession America. Jasmine's story resonated powerfully with audiences who had witnessed similar financial collapses, social pretensions, and psychological breakdowns in their own communities during the economic crisis. But perhaps the most significant validation came from mental health professionals and psychological researchers who praised the film's clinically accurate portrayal of narcissistic personality disorder and acute psychological breakdown. Unlike most Hollywood representations of mental illness, which tend to sensationalize or oversimplify complex psychological conditions, Jasmine's mental health crisis was presented with scientific accuracy while remaining dramatically compelling and emotionally accessible to general audiences. Cate's performance became the new standard for how professional actors could portray mental illness without stigmatizing or exploiting psychological suffering for dramatic effect. Her work demonstrated how deeply researched, emotionally committed acting could illuminate complex psychological conditions while maintaining dramatic integrity and artistic sophistication. The Academy Award recognition was almost inevitable given the performance's combination of technical mastery, emotional courage, and cultural relevance. Cate's work in Blue Jasmine was universally considered the finest female acting performance of 2013, combining sophisticated character development with psychological insight that elevated the entire film above typical commercial entertainment. When she won the Oscar for Best Actress in 2014, Cate's acceptance speech specifically thanked Woody for creating a character that had fundamentally challenged her assumptions about women, class privilege, mental health, and the responsibilities of actors when portraying psychological dysfunction. The role had permanently changed how she understood the relationship between performance and psychology. But perhaps the most culturally significant aspect of Blue Jasmine's critical and commercial success was how it demonstrated Woody's continued relevance as a filmmaker in his late 70s. After more than a decade of criticism that his work had become repetitive, self-indulgent, or out of touch with contemporary social concerns, Blue Jasmine proved definitively that he could still create psychologically sophisticated characters that reflected current anxieties while maintaining the dialogue brilliance and emotional depth that had always characterized his finest work. The film's unflinching examination of economic inequality, social pretension, gender expectations, and psychological vulnerability felt completely contemporary and culturally urgent, while maintaining the psychological sophistication and verbal wit that had defined Woody's artistic voice for decades. For Cate, Blue Jasmine represented a career-defining performance that showcased her extraordinary range while establishing her permanently as one of the finest actors of her generation. The role proved conclusively that she could handle psychological complexity that challenged audiences while delivering the kind of nuanced, emotionally honest performance that elevates commercial entertainment into serious artistic achievement. The film also demonstrated how experienced, accomplished filmmakers and genuinely committed actors could collaborate to explore difficult, uncomfortable subject matter with intelligence, empathy, and artistic integrity rather than sensationalizing or exploiting psychological suffering for dramatic effect. Jasmine French became one of contemporary cinema's most complex and psychologically authentic female characters, simultaneously victim and perpetrator, sympathetic and infuriating, psychologically realistic and dramatically compelling. The character's lasting cultural impact demonstrates that sophisticated audiences are genuinely hungry for nuanced explorations of human psychology when they're delivered with artistic skill and emotional honesty. The film's success also marked a significant evolution in Woody's career-long exploration of neurotic characters and psychological themes. While his earlier work had often focused on male anxiety and intellectual neurosis, Blue Jasmine represented his most successful attempt to understand and portray female psychology with equal depth and authenticity. Today, Blue Jasmine is considered one of Woody Allen's finest achievements and Cate Blanchett's greatest performance. The film proved that psychological realism and commercial success could coexist when talented artists committed fully to exploring difficult truths about human nature, social inequality, and mental health. The collaboration between these two accomplished artists created a lasting work of cinema that continues to influence how filmmakers approach psychological storytelling and how actors prepare for emotionally demanding roles that require genuine empathy for deeply flawed characters. Their work together stands as proof that even veteran filmmakers can continue to evolve artistically and create culturally relevant work that challenges audiences while maintaining the sophisticated entertainment values that define great cinema. The creative process behind Blue Jasmine also revealed new dimensions of Woody's directorial approach that had evolved over his 5-decade career. Unlike his earlier films where he often cast himself as the neurotic protagonist, Blue Jasmine required him to step back and observe female psychology from the outside, creating space for Cate's interpretation while providing the structural framework for her performance. This shift from participant to observer marked a significant evolution in Woody's artistic development. The film proved he could create compelling characters outside his own demographic experience while maintaining the psychological insight that had always distinguished his best work from conventional Hollywood entertainment. The rehearsal process for Blue Jasmine was particularly intensive, with Woody and Cate spending weeks exploring Jasmine's psychological landscape through improvisation and character development exercises. Unlike his typical minimal rehearsal approach, the complexity of Jasmine's mental state required extensive preparation to ensure authenticity. These rehearsals became masterclasses in psychological character development, with Cate discovering layers of Jasmine's personality that weren't explicitly written in the script. Her background in theater proved invaluable for accessing the emotional depth required to make such an unsympathetic character genuinely compelling. The film's costume design and production values also played crucial roles in establishing Jasmine's psychological state. Her designer clothes became increasingly inappropriate for her circumstances, creating visual metaphors for her inability to adapt to changed circumstances. The contrast between her expensive wardrobe and her sister's modest apartment emphasized the psychological distance between Jasmine's self-image and her reality. Cinematographer Javier Aguirre worked closely with Woody to create visual styles that reflected Jasmine's mental state through lighting and camera movement. The film's visual language subtly reinforced the character's psychological journey without drawing attention away from Cate's performance. The supporting cast, including Sally Hawkins as Ginger and Bobby Cannavale as Chili, provided essential grounding for Jasmine's more extreme psychological states. Their naturalistic performances created a realistic world that made Jasmine's delusions and social pretensions more dramatically effective. Blue Jasmine's influence extended beyond individual performances to impact how contemporary filmmakers approach psychological storytelling. The film demonstrated that audiences could handle complex, morally ambiguous characters when they were presented with sufficient depth and authenticity. Mental health advocacy groups praised the film for its realistic portrayal of psychological breakdown without sensationalizing or stigmatizing mental illness. The film became a reference point for how cinema could address mental health issues responsibly while maintaining dramatic integrity. For aspiring actors, Cate's performance in Blue Jasmine became required studying for how to approach psychologically complex characters. Her method of finding empathy for an unlikable character while maintaining emotional truth influenced acting pedagogy at major drama schools worldwide. The film's commercial success also proved that audiences were hungry for sophisticated adult entertainment that didn't rely on action or spectacle for dramatic impact. Blue Jasmine grossed over $76 million worldwide against a modest $18 million budget, demonstrating the continued viability of character-driven cinema. Award recognition extended beyond Cate's Oscar to include nominations for Best Picture and Best Original Screenplay, acknowledging both the collaborative achievement and Woody's continued relevance as a writer. The film's success revitalized interest in his entire filmography among younger audiences discovering his work through Blue Jasmine. The lasting impact of Blue Jasmine can be seen in subsequent films that attempt to explore similar themes of class anxiety and psychological breakdown. However, few have matched the combination of psychological accuracy, artistic sophistication, and emotional authenticity that Woody and Cate achieved together. Critics continue to cite Blue Jasmine as evidence of both artists' peak creative powers, representing a perfect confluence of experienced filmmaking and committed performance that elevated familiar themes into something genuinely revelatory about contemporary American society. The film's exploration of economic inequality through the lens of personal psychology proved prescient as American wealth disparity continued to grow throughout the 2010s. Jasmine's inability to adapt to reduced circumstances reflected broader societal anxieties about downward mobility and the fragility of middle-class security. Educational institutions began incorporating Blue Jasmine into curricula for psychology, sociology, and film studies, recognizing its value as both artistic achievement and social commentary. The film became a case study for how entertainment could illuminate complex social issues without sacrificing dramatic effectiveness. International critics particularly praised the film's universality despite its American setting. Jasmine's psychological profile translated across cultures, revealing how economic systems worldwide create similar patterns of dependency among privileged populations. The collaboration between Woody Allen and Cate Blanchett in Blue Jasmine represents one of contemporary cinema's most successful explorations of individual psychology and social structure. Their achievement demonstrates how great art emerges when experienced artists commit fully to exploring uncomfortable truths about human nature and inequality. Blue Jasmine remains relevant today as both psychological study and social commentary, proving that sophisticated entertainment can address serious themes while maintaining the wit, intelligence, and emotional depth that define lasting cinema. If this story gave you a new perspective, there's more coming. Hit the bell icon so you don't miss the next Untold moment.